Webinar. All right, recording is on. Let's get going. So first of all, thanks for being here today for our GWN series training webinar. My name is Phil Bowers. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager here at Grandstream. We basically, for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to walk you through the three products in our GWN series of networking solutions. GWN7610 that you see here on the screen, GWN7600, which was announced brand new on Tuesday, and the GWN7000, our first router, which we also announced on Tuesday. We'll go through kind of what makes each device so great, what features they offer. We'll highlight the embedded controller that's built into all of these devices, which is maybe the best thing about these devices. And we will also cover some deployment scenarios before going into the technical part of the webinar. If you do have any questions at any point in time, feel free to type them over to us through that chat on the on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll do our best to address as many questions as we can as the webinar goes, but anything we can't get to, we will hold for the question and answer period at the end. All right, so the GWN7610, the one that you see here on the screen, this was the first member of our GWN portfolio. It is a mid-tier wireless access point. It's been out since just about October, November timeframe. So this was the first GWN series device. If you guys have been hearing about or actually using our the GWN devices, this was the device that you had, this wireless mid-tier wireless access point. On Tuesday, we began to expand the GWN series, and as we go forward, the GWN series is going to grow even a lot more than what it is right now. Right now, as you'll see, we have two different access points, one router. The GWN and this entire expansion into wireless networking and networking in general is one of the biggest, I'll say, expansions or additions to Grandstream. We're not going anywhere with the SIP or the UC products that everybody knows and loves from us. What we're doing here is we're adding on wireless networking to our portfolio to allow our resellers, our partners, to offer their clients really high-end Wi-Fi access with some great features that makes these devices easier and more powerful than ever before. So just keep that in mind. As we go, the GWN series will be expanded with additional access points, additional routers, both high-end, mid-range, and low-end. We will also have a variety of weatherproof outdoor access points. So to get back on topic here, the GWN7600, this is, it says entry level. It's a little bit of an entry level. It's more of a mid-tier wireless access point. This guy, in comparison to the 7610 that I just showed you, supports a little bit slower speeds, but offers the ability to support a lot more Wi-Fi clients. Usually when you're talking about tiers of access points, what might be mid-range, low-end, high-end, you're generally talking about the speeds that they offer. 7610 offers 1.75 gigs a second. This offers 1.27. Coverage range between the two devices is pretty much the same, 175 meters. And then security, which we'll talk about. Dual band Wi-Fi, obviously all of these access points support dual band Wi-Fi, and the embedded controller, which again, I will come back to a little bit. And so the third member of our GWN series is the GWN7000. This is an enterprise-grade multi-WAN gigabit VPN router. We announced it on Tuesday. It's the first router in our portfolio. The embedded controller that you're going to hear a lot about today with the access points, also featured on this router. The controller in the router is actually a lot more powerful than the controller in the access points, which just allows it to set up, control, and manage many more access points than what you can do with just one access point. And we'll explain that a little bit later on. So most of the webinar today, especially the technical part, is going to focus on the access points. We could probably spend at least an hour and a half, 2 hours just covering the GWN7000. It's obviously, if you're used to the VoIP side of things, it's basically a PBX for your network. So there's a lot more features, a lot more technical understanding, and a lot more technical elements to go through. So we will have a separate GWN7000 router training webinar probably within the next 3 or 4 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. Yeah, we'll come back to the router a little bit later on. So, switching back to the two access points, the 7610 and the 7600. The 5 things here on the screen are, at least in my opinion, the 5 most outstanding features or functionalities that these devices offer. First is the range, 175 meters or 165 meters. Both of these access points use omnidirectional microphones, or excuse me, not microphones, antennas, which basically means they can transmit in any direction. So it's not a 175 meter radius or diameter or anything like that. It is a straight line in 175 or 165 meters in any direction from the device. 175 meters is just about 2 football or 2 soccer fields, so quite some distance there. We offer up to 16 SSIDs per access point. This is actually a lot more than most similar tiered access points offer. In many cases, we're offering 4 to 5 times, sometimes I guess 8 times with devices that only support 2 SSIDs. More networks per access point, and that just gives you such a great ability to customize these to have up to 16 different networks on each access point. That can be 16 different networks on each access point, 16 different networks that are shared between groups of access point, lots of customization there. Network speeds, again, we pretty much talked about that earlier. You see it on the next slide, either 1.75 or 1.27 gigabytes per second. And as I mentioned, usually what's going to be a little bit higher end of an access point is one that supports faster speeds, which in this case would be the 7610. The controllerless management. This is the embedded provisioning controller that we keep talking about. I have a slide coming up for this later on, but basically we have built with most other manufacturers, you're going to need separate controller hardware or software. Sometimes you have to purchase this in addition, but even if it comes with the device, it adds a lot of steps into the setup of the device. You have to put an access point in one location, you have to go back to your controller, you've got to sync up the controller with that access point, and then if you want to add more, you pretty much got to do each one individually. We have built that functionality, the functionality of the controller into the web user interface of these products. It is free and included, and that means that each one of these access points can actually basically be set as a master to set up, control, manage up either 30 other access points if it's a GWN7600 or 50 other access points. So you can literally use one access point to deploy an entire wireless network. Obviously, you got to connect it back to a router, but it gives you one centralized interface to be able to do that. Client access, also another really important feature. 250 clients with the 7610, 450 for the 7600. As I mentioned earlier, a couple of times now, the 7610, though it supports less clients, supports faster speed. So if you're really looking for something that is going to maximize the speed and give you a little bit faster speeds, the 7610 is for you. If you're more interested in just offering Wi-Fi access to a lot of people in large areas, hotels, convention centers, areas where, frankly, you're not concerned about how it's not a business, an enterprise environment, so you don't have to offer, blazing fast internet speeds. And the 7600 is great for you. It's going to support up to 450 clients, and it still gives you pretty powerful network speeds there. In terms of hardware specs, I'm going to talk about Wi-Fi standards coming up. That's just to show you that we pretty much support all the major Wi-Fi standards, including pretty much the backwards compatible ones that might be used by older routers. Network interfaces is always important to point out. Both of these access points have 2 auto-sensing gigabit ports. They give you one USB port, they give you one reset pin, and they actually give you Kensington lock, the ability to actually integrate or basically connect these to a Kensington lock to secure the access point. So that's hardware specs. Now we're looking at software specs. Pretty much went through most of this. Wi-Fi security we're going to come back to in a moment. I'd always like to point out with these access points here that they do support QoS. You see the VLAN and the TOS down there. We'll come back to the network management soon. And actually, this is important to mention too. Both of these devices support both PoE or PoE+, so you can power these access points with PoE or PoE+. The 802.11 standards, this is, as I mentioned, just pretty much to show you that we support not just 802.11ac, which is pretty much the newest, most comprehensive Wi-Fi standard, but we also support the, A, B, G, and N that you see on here. A lot of these are older frequencies. Basically, the best way that, the value of this is that if you have older routers or if you have an older network that might be running an older standard, our access point, it will be compatible with it. Pretty much backwards compatible in terms of Wi-Fi standards. All right, so now we get to two slides I have here on security. This slide gives you security encryption technology. This is encrypting basically the data, the connection, and the clients that are accessing a Wi-Fi connection creates an authentication and a handshake and a secure connection between an access point and any Wi-Fi client. There are 6 different encryption technologies here on the slide. And as I mentioned, they range from everything from protecting data to protecting the Wi-Fi clients to actually creating a secure connection between the two. A lot of other different things going on here. So what I would encourage you to do is go look at what other manufacturers offer, well-known manufacturers offer in terms of security in their access points. You're going to find that most of them are going to offer you some combination of these 6, but not actually all 6. And we do offer all 6 of these Wi-Fi security encryption technologies. And to take that a little even further, we have built 4, frankly, really high-end network protections on top of what I just showed you on the last slide. I'll try to explain them to you here very quickly. I'm going to start with the bottom just because it's actually, for telling a story, it works better to start with the random default password. The easiest way for me to describe this is to tell you what other people do compared to what we do. So most access points out there are going to have a predictable random default password. When you first access the product, when you first install it, before somebody changes the password, the default password on a lot of third-party access points is predictable, meaning that it's the serial number, it's the MAC address, or it's literally, a standard admin password across all of their access points. And what we do is we put a completely different and randomly generated default password on every single access point. And basically what that does is it just prevents anybody when you first connect your network or set these devices up. It prevents anyone from right away being able to go hack into them or take a device that might be down on your network or in your office and be able to get into it somehow. So just to add, again, another layer of password security, we're always going to recommend that you change the password to something unique and unique to you. But we essentially do that for you right off the bat. So the next layer here is the unique security certificate. So again, I guess the easiest way to describe this is to tell you what other people do. With most other access point manufacturers, so what a security certificate is it's basically a handshake or a secure connection, that's established between an access point and a Wi-Fi client. The access point extends the security certificate out to that client, and that's how the connection is pretty much established and based on. Most other manufacturers are going to, every one of their access points will offer the same exact security certificate to every Wi-Fi client on the network. So literally, if you have 200 different clients connected to one access point, all 200 of those clients have the exact same security certificate with many other manufacturers. And the problem there is that if anybody is able to break into or hack into one of the layers, any one security certificate, they can then get into your entire network and every client that is connected to your network. And what we do is it's a completely different security certificate per device, per Wi-Fi client. So basically, if in the example I just gave, all 200 of those clients would have different security protocols, different security certificates. So if you hacked into one, that's as far as you could get. And then we add those 2 layers on top: anti-hacking security, critical data and control lockdown. The easy way to describe this is there's lots of different layers of hardware and software in these devices. They're constantly monitoring themselves, but they also constantly monitor the other layers. And if anything is off, if anything looks off to one of the layers from another layer, it will basically lock down the system and your data and prevent any intrusion or any access to it. So 4 really high-end network protections that we have added in addition to just the Wi-Fi encryption security. All right, so I'm just going to throw this slide up here. Abdel's going to tell you a lot more about the controllerless management or the embedded controller. This is, the example you see here shows an access point. This controller is also built into our router, as I mentioned, and actually the controller and the router can support, I believe it's either 300 or 500 or somewhere between that. I honestly don't remember off the top of my head because we were going back and forth between those two. But basically it allows you to take any one access point and set up and manage and provision entire networks of other access points with this free included controller software that's built right into the web user interface. You'll see a lot of this later on. It is incredibly easy to use. It is incredibly simple to set up networks with this controller, whether you're using our access points or the routers. And the example you see on the right is kind of what I explained to you earlier with controllers that have to basically manually connect to each access point. Doesn't allow you, a lot of them are not going to allow you to, create entire networks with a couple of clicks like we do. And a lot of other manufacturers require you to buy that controller software or hardware separate. So I'll fly through this. You'll hear about this more later on. All right, so real quickly here, give you some more information on the router that we talked about earlier. Some of the features, really the highlights of it: 7 gigabit ports, included firewall protection, multi-WAN with load balancing and failover, 1 million packets per second routing, 10 gigabits per second extended out to all of the access points, and offers you a variety of VPN options, including OpenVPN. In terms of the hardware specs of the router, anything that I should point out here? No, I think a lot of this is explained better in the next coming slides, so I will move past this. Just to show you the interfaces or the ports of the device, it gives you your 2 gigabit WAN ports. It's got that net port in the middle that's configurable as LAN, WAN, or VoIP, and then you've got 4 gigabit LAN ports over there on the right-hand side. The screenshot that you see here is of the centralized user interface or control interface, whatever you want to call it, that works with, or that actually is included with the GWN7000. So not only does it have the controller functionality built into it, but it also has this centralized provisioning panel, or management panel, excuse me. Basically gives you the ability from one central area to see information about any access point, any Wi-Fi client that is connected, provisioned to the router. Again, this is free software built into the web user interface in addition to the controller to give you this one centralized interface to manage, track, etc. your network. The USB ports that are on these devices can be integrated with, allows you, to integrate them with printer services, file sharing or file storage services, wireless printing services, 3G, 4G, LTE backup, etc., etc. Yeah, that's pretty much the highlight there. Network manageability, you'll hear more about that later. VPN. Pretty much self-explanatory, and we talked about that earlier. Just gives you the ability to set up, VPN tunnels between our GWN7000, 2 different physical locations, to allow 2 different offices or 2 different physical locations anywhere, or multiple physical locations, to share network connections and network resources. All right, let me just go real quickly wrap up my intro by going through these deployment scenarios. Pretty much 3, honestly, like basic, easy ones to explain, but they kind of give you a full grasp of the power of these devices and really how they can be customized. So when we're talking about a small office, usually what you're looking for is you want to be able to offer people in that office or in that small area the ability to move around the entire office without losing a network connection, without having to log into a new network, without having to put in different login credentials, for example. So the example and the best deployment here is having numerous access points that all share the same networks and the same access credentials. Basically allows you to move anywhere within the office, and if you go out of range of one access point, you just seamlessly transition to the same network being offered by one of the new access point that you're in range of. Multiple floor office or an enterprise, for example, the example here is many different access points that are offering many different networks. You have different floors of your office or of these large buildings that have different teams or different people, different groups working on each. You can build separate and specific networks for each team, and also have networks for guests, visitors, management, your security team, maybe some consultants, anything like that. So many different access points with the ability to really get down and customize the SSIDs or the networks you're offering on all of those access points. And then the last example here is the multiple branch offices, and again, I pretty much just explained this with the VPN. Creating a VPN tunnel between two or multiple locations to allow, two different businesses on, Grandstream in Boston to share, network resources, et cetera, with Grandstream's LA office, for example. All right, so that wraps up my intro. Just bear with us here for a second. We will transfer over to Abdel to go through the technical part of the webinar. No, I'll just pull that. You good?
Yes.
Awesome.
All right, thanks, Phil, for the informative introduction. This is Abdel. Now I'll take it over from here to show you the web interface and how you can configure the GWN using the GUI interface. So the first thing, when you receive the GWN, you need to have some way to access the web interface, and I mean to get the IP address so you can access the web interface. As you can see on my screen, I'm using the MAC address to access the web interface of the GWN. So the thing that you have to do, just check the tag on the back of the GWN, then type in HTTPS GWN _ and then type in the MAC address of the GWN .local. This will take you to the login page of the GWN. In case you have multiple GWNs and you would like to detect their MAC addresses, you can use the GWN discovery tool provided for free by Grandstream. You can get it from grandstream.com under support, and then go to tools, then click on GWN discovery tool. This is the software that you're going to download from Grandstream. Just select your network interface, click OK, and then start scanning your network. So for the purpose of the webinar today, I have two GWN that we're going to use for demonstration. So the IPs is 101, and then the second one is .102. So I'm just going to stop this tool, then we go straight to the web interface and login. By default, the username is admin, the password is admin. So when you log in for the first time, the GWN is going to prompt you to change the password to something else other than admin. So I'm just going to put a different password. And by the way, the first GWN that you used, that you logged into the web interface, is always going to be the master GWN that you can use in your master-slave design in your network. So when you log in for the first time, the setup wizard is going to pop up. You can use it to configure the GWN, or you can simply close it, and then you can do all the configuration manually from the web interface. If you want to go back to the setup wizard, just click on this icon, then the wizard is going to pop up so you can do your configuration. So the top one is the overview page, which has like a dashboard style that gives you information about your access points. It's very useful, especially for monitoring the access points in your existing network. It gives you information. Since we were able to scan 2 access points, it's going to give you the total of discovered access points. One of them is online, and plus another one that is discovered. If you have clients, it's going to show you the number of clients that are connected to your access points. Currently, this is a brand new. I don't have any clients connected to the GWN. The AP channel distribution, this is a very useful, especially it helps you make the distribution of your channels more effective. From this interface, you can see which channel is being used by the access point. So when you run one of those wireless tools that you use to detect the surrounding access points, for example, in the neighboring offices or houses, by using these tools and determine which channel is being used a lot or is overcrowded, you can just come to the GWN from this web interface and see which channel is being used by the access point. Then if you see or if you notice that this channel is being overcrowded and congested, you can just go to the access point page and then change the channel to something different that is not being used by other access points in your surrounding. The top APs, it gives you information about the APs that are connected to the master. Remember, this is we're still talking about the master. The top SSIDs, by default, the GWN, they come with a default SSID which made of GWN, and then the last characters, these are the last characters of the MAC address of the GWN that I'm using. In our case, it's 9791D0. And the password for that SSID is typed or written on the tag in the back of the GWN. Here it shows the clients that are connected to the access points, and also gives you information about alert, notification. Just by clicking on it, you can go and access all those alerts and notifications. You can also filter them by critical, normal, or errors. For these next pages, you can access, for example, access points by clicking on the access points, or you can do it also from the overview page just by clicking on the 3-dot icon. So right now I have only one access point, and this one is acting as the master, as you can see under the status. As I mentioned, I have another access point. If you would like to discover other access points in your network, just go to Discover APs, and that's one of the APs that were discovered, to pair them to the master access points so they can become slave and you can manage them from the master web interface. Just click on pair, and then the device will be paired to the master. So you don't have to go and log into each slave access point. You can manage all these access points from the built-in controller, the web interface of the master GWN. You can upgrade these devices, you can reboot them, you can change them just by clicking on the edit icon. So we can go ahead and look at some of the configurations that you can do on the access points. So when you click on the edit icon, it just gives you information about the status, what is the MAC address, the model, the IP address, also the firmware version, and the uptime and the current time. It gives you also information about the users that are connected to this access point. Later I'm going to try to connect one of the wireless clients to one of these access points. So when you see like a client is connected, it's going to give you information about the MAC address of that device, the host name. This is something that you need to configure. The RSSI, it gives you information about the signal strength, the throughput, which means it gives you for the TX and RX, if that person is using a lot of bandwidth. Then under the aggregate, it gives you information about the total bandwidth that was used by that wireless client during a specific period of time. So go into configuration. This is where you do most of your configuration. You can assign a name to the device. You can call it master. By default, the access points, they come with DHCP enabled. If you would like to assign a static IP address, just check fixed IP, then start entering the information for the static, including the IP address, subnet mask, the gateway, and of course the DNS IP address. As Phil mentioned earlier, our access points are dual band. We support 5 GHz and 2.4 GHz. If you would like the access point, for example, to be dedicated to 2.4 or 5 GHz, just choose the frequency. And the access point will only use whatever frequency you have specified, either 2.4 or 5 GHz. So I'm just going to leave it dual band. Also, there's this feature, it's called Enable Band Steering, because a lot of wireless clients that support dual band will generally try to connect to the 2.4 GHz by default. This could lead to congestion and overcrowding on the band 2.4, and that is when dual band steering becomes really helpful. So when the AP detects that the wireless client supports dual band, which means it supports both 2.4 and 5 GHz, and by enabling this feature, the AP will place the client on the less congested 5 GHz band. It does this by prioritizing the use of 5 GHz instead of 2.4. And just to give you some information, about the differences when you need to use 2.4 versus 5 GHz. For 2.4 GHz, it is more susceptible to interference and congestion, especially when you have devices like cordless phones, microwaves, and a lot of Bluetooth connections. It has 3 non-overlapping channels, channel 1, 6, and 11. The good thing about the 2.4 is range. It has a greater range than the 5 GHz. And the 5 GHz on the other side is less susceptible to interference and congestion because it has more non-overlapping channels. It also has a higher speed when compared to 2.4. Compared to the 2.4, as I mentioned earlier, it has less range than the 2.4 GHz. Generally, if bandwidth is the major concern in your network, I would suggest you go with the 5 GHz. But if range is your concern, 2.4 GHz is definitely a better choice. If there are multiple wireless clients in your environment, it is recommended to use 5 GHz because it provides more channels non-overlapping channels compared to 2.4. There's also the option where you can choose the channel width. Just information about the channel width. The wider the channel, let's say we choose 40, the wider the channel, the more speed and the more bandwidth you will get. However, this comes at a cost of having more interference and more congestion. The same thing applies to the 5 GHz, which gives you the option between 20, 40, and 80. This is where I told you can change the channel. For example, if you see that there are a lot of surrounding APs that they use, for example, channel 6, you can just come here and change it to channel 11. any channel that is not being used by other access points. You can do the same thing on the 5 gigahertz. The next one is enable short guard interval. This one is helpful because it helps increase the throughput actually that's going to the access points. By default, the normal short guard interval is 800 nanoseconds, which is the time space between characters. So when you enable the short guard interval, you actually shrink it from 800 nanoseconds to 400 nanoseconds, which ultimately increase the speed and throughput of your wireless connection. The next option is active spatial streams. Because our GWN7610 has the MIMO technology 3x3:3, which means it has 3 antennas for transmission and 3 antennas for reception. Plus, it supports 3 streams. So, in case you would like the the GWN to manage the streams, you can just leave it to auto. If you would like the GWN to always use 3 streams, you can just choose number 3. The radio power, that depends. If you have an access point in a small room, you can choose low. If you have it in a bigger room and you would like to extend the range, of course you need to change to set that one to high. So every time you make changes, then you save them. They don't take effect until you click on apply. If you're not sure about the changes that you made, you can always revert back before you click on apply. So when you click on apply, it's going to give you status about the things that have been updated. For example, this one, we're still waiting for the network. The spinning one means it's still in progress. The solid green means it has been updated already. As you can see, the edit icon on the GWN this one is disabled because it was offline, so now it's back online. You can go ahead and do the same thing. You can, for example, if I have this slave access point and I wanted to use only 5 gigahertz, or I have a client that use only 5 gigahertz, I can come here and change the frequency to 5 gigahertz and give it a name like slave 2 or slave 1, depends on the naming policy in your network. So moving forward, the network group, by default, the group 0 is created by default with the SSID that I mentioned earlier, which is made of GWN and the last 6 characters of the MAC address of the GWN. You can go ahead and edit that one. You can change the name if you don't like the default name. You can go to Wi-Fi. This is where you configure the Wi-Fi settings. If you have another network group and you would like to disable that one, just uncheck this box and the network group will be disabled. You can change the SSID to something different. SSID hidden, in case you don't like the GWN to broadcast the SSID, you can just check that one, so only people who know the SSID will be able to join the wireless connection. Also, as Phil talked about this in details, about the security encryption modes that we support the WEP, WPA, and WPA2. And you can also make it open, which is not recommended. For a better security, it's always better to use the WPA2 because it has a strong encryption algorithm and it also provides advanced authentication. So the key mode for the WPA, we support both pre-shared key or PSK and 802.1 for port security. We also support the IES or IES TKIP. You can configure the password for the SSID. Then you can also use MAC filtering. So for example, in case you have this access point and you have specific devices that only need to use that access point. You can create a whitelist with the MAC addresses of these devices. Just enter the MAC address. You can add multiple ones. So by doing this, only the devices that has the MAC addresses in the whitelist will be able to connect to the GWN. Client isolation, this is also a nice feature. So when you check the client isolation, basically what you do, you restrict clients, wireless clients that are connected to that specific GWN to talk to each other. They can only talk to through the gateway. So when you check that one, that's why it's asking you about the MAC address of the gateway, because they can, for example, access the internet, they can do all the stuff, but they can't access other wireless clients that are using the same GWN. This is very good, especially when you have the access point used for guests. That's a very useful one. The next one we have the RSSI. RSSI stands for Received Signal Strength Indicator. So when you enable that one, you tell the gateway provide wireless connection to only devices that has a higher power, a higher signal strength than whatever you have configured here. For example, if I configure that one with -60 and I have other wireless devices, so when they send the strength signal, when it reaches the access point, for example, the access point detects that it's -80 or -90, they will not be able to connect to the access point. This is useful, especially when you have multiple access points and you always want to keep the strength of the signal strong. You can specify that one like to a higher level, so people can always have a strong signal. So when they move out of that signal range, they can connect to the next access points. Device membership, we have the master by default. Then we can include the other slave access points, so they can both be part of the same network group. If you want to assign the network groups only to the master access point, you can just leave the master access point as the selected devices and do not select the slave access point. The next one is for additional SSIDs, and as it was mentioned earlier, you can create up to 16 SSIDs on each GWN 7610. So just by clicking on Add SSID, you can configure an SSID and then enable it, or just create it and then leave it disabled until you need it. You can assign it a name. So we can call that one something like guest room. Then we can choose the network group to be used for that SSID, since we only have the default one, so we're just going to use the default one, which is group 0. The same thing that we did with the network group, you can also hide the SSID. You can configure one specific SSID and hide it from being broadcast, so only people who know the SSID will be able to join the wireless network. The same thing applies to the security mode. As I mentioned earlier, it's always recommended to use the strongest one, which is the WPA2. You can configure the pre-shared or the password for the SSID. You can enter any password that meets your requirements. The same thing, you can create a whitelist or you can create a blacklist so that people will not connect to that SSID. We talked about client isolation. We talked about enable RSSI and how you can set up the dBm or the signal strength of the signal. So I'm going to try to connect one of my wireless client's devices so you can see the information that it shows. So let me go back here. So I'm going to change the password to something different. So now I have one of the portable phones connected to the access point. So it's just going to give you information about the MAC address of that specific device. You can even change the name of it if in case you would like, for example, to remember. This is my Android-based phone. I can just call it Android. So whenever it connects to the network, I would know which device is that one. It gives you also the IP address of that device, the radio or the channel that is being used by that device. It tells you also information about which access point that wireless client is being connected to. So once you start, browsing the internet, you will see that the throughput and the aggregates will change to indicate, as you can see here, the TX jumped to 86 bytes per second. The aggregate is the accumulation of the bandwidth that has been used by that specific wireless client device. You can edit that one. You can change the host name of it, or you can get access to the information, the same thing that we saw from the main interface. You can see the channel, for how long this device has been connected, what is the IP address. You can change the host name as we did. In case you see that this device is not authorized to connect to your wireless access point, you can just block that IP by clicking on this icon. Are you sure you want to block the client? You can just click on OK. Then that client will be blocked from connecting to your access points. So the system settings gives information about maintenance. This is where you can change the password for the admin, also the password for the users, where you can configure a syslog server in case you would like to be capturing logs from the access point all the time. You can just point it to whatever capturing device that will be capturing the syslog messages. This is the level you can choose between debug, info, warning, or error. In case you are troubleshooting the access point, it's always recommended to use debug because you would like to see all the information in the syslog. This is the feature SIP ALG. This one can be used especially when you have VoIP over IP devices like wireless phones. You can also change the country if you are in the United States, you can change, which is the default, or you can change it to a different country, because changing the country can also change the numbers of channels, especially under the 2.4 gigahertz. For example, if you choose Japan, this will increase the number of available channels from 11 in the United States to 13. You can also configure the time zone, the NTP server, the date display format. You can also configure information about the provisioning, authenticate config file if you would like to authenticate or challenge pushing of all provisioning notifications. You can also, when you have, this is going to be useful, especially when you have like the master configured. You would like to download the configuration of that device as a backup in case something happens. You can just go ahead and restore the backup. In case you have multiple GWN and you would like to push the changes to these GWN, through the provisioning server. You can encrypt the file, the XML file that you need to push to the GWN by using OpenSSL. It's a line of command that you need to run on a Linux machine. And you're going to use that password that you used to generate the encryption and just put it in there so it can be used for decrypting the configuration file. Upgrading the GWN, we support 3 modes, TFTP, HTTP, and HTTPS. In case you would like to use the Grandstream website, you can just type in firmware.grandstream.com, and config server, that depends on where you have the provisioning config file. This box right here, so when you check that one, you just tell the UCM, whenever you reboot, go and check if there is a new firmware version. You can also configure automatic check for a firmware version, something that you can do, for example, every week or every day or every hour. Or you can do manual upgrade of the GWN. Just click on upgrade, then upload the bin file for the firmware, and then just start doing your upgrade. Download configuration, this is where you get the backup of the GWN just by clicking on download. Then you can save that file somewhere. So in case something happens to the master, you can just put a new GWN, upload the configuration to that new GWN, then it's going to start acting as the master. Or you can do it manually, uploading the configuration, or you can provision it. You have a lot of choices. You can reboot, you can factory reset the GWN. So moving to the debug, we support 2 options here for troubleshooting the capture. GWN has a built-in Wireshark, so when you would like to troubleshoot or you want to capture traffic going through your GWN, you can simply start your capture. For the capture to work on the GWN, you will need to have a USB drive or USB thumb connected to the USB port in the back of the GWN. So when you're done, when the capture is done, you can just come here, start the capture. When you're done, just click on stop. Then it's going to show up here under the file. Then you can list it. Then you can just put it in your own computer. Then you can start analyze it in case you're interested in the traffic that was captured. But core dump, this is also one of the tools that you can use to troubleshoot your system. Core dumps generally, they are generated when there is like a system crash on the GWN or something that is abnormal has taken place in the GWN. That's what causes the GWN to create those core dumps. So I just created those for the purpose of demonstration. You can download them, and in case there is an issue and you would like to send it to us so we can analyze them, just download it, attach it to the ticket, and then we can look at them. You can delete them from this icon. You can also use the ping or the traceroute tools from the web interface of the 7610. And the last one is the SNMP, which is used for monitoring and sending logs to an SNMP device. You can choose which version of SNMP you are using. Just add and configure it based on the SNMP device that you're going to be using for capturing the traffic from the GWN. And I think we have covered most of the settings and configurations of the GWN7610. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask them, and we will answer them for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Abdel. Actually, Ben, probably want to unshare your screen just so you see it too.
Yeah.
All right. There were some questions that came in earlier, so I'll go through those. Some of these you may have answered, and if so, you can just let me know. Question about VLANs, which I imagine that you mentioned at some point in time.
Yeah, you can. Yes. So when you create the network groups, you can actually assign it to VLAN to that specific network group. But you should remember, you can only assign VLANs to network groups. You can't manage VLANs the way you do it from the switch. So you can simply take the VLAN number from the switch and just assign it to a network group.
Cool. So the question is, and I know what he's getting at here, do the access points have a web portal for users to agree to security, basically like a login, you know, for like a customer network or something like that?
That one is not supported yet. Probably in the future.
Yeah, I know that that's something we've talked about.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think some routers might even give you the ability to extend a service like that out to an access point.
Yeah, you can do it through a router.
Yeah, so that's another feature too, or another way to do it. Let's see, what else do we got here? Integration with Active Directory?
No, there's no interface to sync with Active Directory on a Windows server. That's not supported yet, probably in the future.
Cool. And this question came in as you were going through network groups earlier. Are different groups isolated from one another? For example, Group 0 for employees and Group 1 for visitors?
Yeah, you can isolate them, yeah. That's different. Because when you create the network group, because this is something probably, because I was working on the default one, but I'm going to show you an example here. So when you go to create like a new network group, it's going to ask you to assign it to VLAN. So when you assign a specific VLAN to a network group, this is something that you can manage from your switch or from your router. In case you have 3 or 4 VLANs and you want to block one VLAN from talking to the other, this is something that you have to do from your switch or your network, because the access point, it doesn't do VLAN management as I mentioned.
Cool. Yeah, if you have any final questions, feel free to type them over to us. One question that I missed, which I can probably answer here, about the router, how does it provide access to file storage through the USB? You would be integrating it with a third-party file sharing or a network-attached storage or something like that, and then configuring that through the router. But as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do a whole training webinar just on that router, probably within the next 3 to 4 weeks, which we will go into a lot more detail on questions like that. Yeah. All right, cool. Yeah, we'll definitely go into a lot more detail on that router in those training webinars. Yeah, so unless there are any final questions, if you do have any final questions, feel free to type them over through the chat. We'll hang around, or I'll hang around for a couple of minutes to take any final questions. Excuse me. But with that, that pretty much wraps up today's webinar. Thank everybody for attending this afternoon. Know that there's always a lot that you can be doing, so we appreciate you taking some time out to spend with us here at Grandstream, learn about these great new GWN networking products, access points, and routers. And keep an eye out for a lot more on the GWN front over the rest of the year, over the coming years, in addition to the 3 devices that we told you about here today. This webinar was recorded, and I will make it available. You'll probably get an email tomorrow with a link to view this webinar as a YouTube video, in which case we can actually also link you up with some older recorded webinars as well. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for being with us today, and have a great day.